procedure for getting into a small field is actually a continuation of your high-altitude emergency that will bring you into a safe landing. However, in the high-altitude emergency, you glided down through checkpoints every 1,000 feet in planning your approach until you reach the number 1 position. Actually, at an altitude of 1,000 feet, you can get into the field either from this position or from position number 2, which is on the landing line directly downwind from the field. Also, in practicing the entry to small fields, you start with power on and enter the circular traffic pattern at an altitude of 1,000 feet with an airspeed of 120 knots and 1,850 RPM with your gas on the best tank for landing. Entry is made at an angle of 45 degrees or less, and the point of intended landing is kept at wingtip distance. The pattern may be entered at any point, but you must pass through the number 1 position before taking your first small field shot. If entry is made beyond the number 1 position, you must circle the field before making a shot at it with closed throttle. If the throttle is closed at the number 1 position, immediately place the prop in full low pitch. Depress the power push and drop your wheels. Trim your plane to a 95-knot glide in balanced flight. When the warning horn stops, check your landing gear down and report an ICS, wheels down and locked. In the straightaway, when you are in a position to reach the desired landing spot in the first third of the field, apply full flaps and adjust your gliding speed to 80 knots. Maintain this attitude until you break your glide for landing. Always take into consideration the effect of the wind force on your flight path during the approach. Under strong wind conditions, which tend to delay your approach, you must make a steeper turn and a minimum amount of crosswind gliding. Conversely, in a light or no wind condition, your altitude must be dissipated by a shallower turn and a maximum of crosswind gliding. You may even have to cross the landing line and return to it in the case of the number 1 shot. If your throttle is closed at the number 2 position, you go through the same procedure. Prop in low pitch, depress power push, landing gear down, trim for a 95-knot glide, and report wheels down and locked when horn stops blowing. Judging your wind, make an S turn back to but not across your landing line. In the straightaway, full flaps are lowered and an 80-knot glide established and maintained until breaking the glide for landing. From the number 2 position also, you must take into account the effect of the prevailing wind condition. In a strong wind, your initial turn is steeper, with a minimum of crosswind gliding. In light or no wind, your initial turn is shallower, with a maximum crosswind glide. Plan your approach from either position so that flaps will be lowered in the straightaway, rather than in your approach turn. The length of your straightaway will vary depending on the type of your approach. However, flaps should be down and an 80-knot glide established with a minimum of 800 feet straightaway and 150 feet altitude from the point of intended landing. Here is a properly executed approach from the number 1 position under normal wind conditions. A 95-knot glide is established. Wheels lowered and locked. The turn into the landing line is made. Full flaps are lowered and the glide adjusted to 80 knots in the straightaway, and the plane goes in for a landing. Remember that in strong wind conditions, your turn would be steeper with a minimum of crosswind gliding. In a no-wind condition, your turn is shallower with a maximum of crosswind gliding. Let's look at it from your viewpoint. You're circling the field at wingtip distance, 1,000 feet altitude at 120 knots. You are approaching the number 1 position. Your instructor closes the throttle. Instinctively, you follow this procedure. You check your instrument panel. Place your prop in low pitch, full increase RPM. Depress the power push. Place the landing gear lever in the down position and trim your plane to maintain a glide of 95 knots in balanced flight. When your warning horn stops blowing, you check your landing gear down and report on your ICS, wheels down and locked. Having established that it's a normal wind, you make a turn in toward the landing line. When it is apparent that you are in position to land in the first third of the field, lower full flaps and adjust your gliding speed to 80 knots. Maintain this attitude, making sure that you clear any obstructions to the entrance to the field by a safe margin. And come in for a full stall landing. Now you are approaching the number 2 position at wingtip distance and with a no wind condition. Abeam the end of the field, your throttle is closed. Put the prop in low pitch. Depress power push. Lower your wheel. And trim your plane to maintain a glide of 95 knots in balanced flight. With a strong wind condition, you would start a shallow turn back to the landing line here. In a normal wind, you would start it here. But in the no wind condition availing today, you wait until you are here, dissipating your altitude on your crosswind glide in a steeply banked turn back to the landing line, and in your return crosswind glide. After joining the landing line, you lower your flaps and adjust your glide to 80 knots. Then go in for your landing. Following your landing, and when the landing run is under control, apply full throttle and take off again. When you are safely airborne and clear of all obstructions, throttle back to 30 inches manifold pressure and adjust the prop to 1950 RPM. At 100 feet, raise your wheels, and at 200, if there are no high obstructions, raise your flaps. To maintain altitude as you raise your flaps, hold the nose attitude you had for 75 knots with full flaps. As your speed increases to 95 knots, trim the plane for normal climbing attitude, and traffic permitting, begin a climbing turn at 250 feet. Continue your climbing turn to join the circular traffic pattern at 1,000 feet and at wingtip distance. Ease your nose down to cruising attitude. At 120 knots, throttle back to 23 to 25 inches manifold pressure and adjust your prop to 1850 RPM. Here is how this maneuver to rejoin the 1,000-foot traffic circle looks. Starting your turn out of the field at 250 feet, you make a gradual climbing turn to the left, so as to join the 1,000-foot traffic circle at a wingtip distance to your landing line, making sure you are clear of any traffic already in the circle. You then continue on toward position number 1. Or if you wish to leave the circle, break away to the right, again at an angle of less than 45 degrees.